So y'all, how we doing today? So if it feels like every decision that you make as an alienated parent has to go through a hostile committee in your head before you're allowed to act, this episode is for you. Maybe you go to send a text and suddenly you're rewriting it 10 times. You think about filing a motion or booking a consult, and then somehow weeks go by, right? You play every visit back in your mind, convinced that you said the wrong thing, looked the wrong way, breathed too loud. You know how it goes, right? So today, if this is you, then I want to offer you a different way to see all of that. I want you to picture that inside of you, there's a scared little kid gripping the steering wheel of your life. Every time you move towards your child or toward a decision that matters, that kid, the kid I'm talking about, not your kid, yanks the wheel and says, nope, too dangerous, turn back around to what we know. So in this episode, we're going to talk about how alienation and chaos put that scared kid in the driver's seat to begin with, how that shows up in your day-to-day, and what it looks like to begin taking back the wheel without having to shove that part of you back in the trunk. Last week, we talked about the comfort regret loop, the way that your brain sells you short-term relief that turns into long-term pain. Today is part 2 of that mini-series. We're zooming in on the role that self-doubt plays in that loop. So before we dive in, I want to come back to the homework I gave you last time. Last week, I asked you to notice any comfort regret loop that you have going on, and then write down one instance where you chose comfort in the moment and then later regretted it. For a lot of you, I know that looked like scrolling instead of reaching out, shutting down instead of sending the text or the card, deciding that today's not the day to schedule either some consult or paperwork or whatever, right? Emotion. Basically, all of those is choosing to stay in the same daily routine instead of taking the risk you know that will pay off long term. If you've noticed any version of that, I want you to hear me. Nothing has gone terribly wrong. Nothing here, okay? I'm not talking about your situation of alienation, but I'm saying with you in this loop. It doesn't mean that you're lazy or that you're unmotivated or that you don't want it badly enough. You don't want change or growth or reconciliation to happen badly enough. It has nothing to do with that. Each one of those moments are actually a giant neon sign pointing to one thing, and one thing only. It's that self-doubt was in the driver's seat at the time. It's a habit, probably a protective mechanism habit that you might have developed, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So if last week was about spotting the comfort regret loop, this week is about meeting that part of you that keeps pulling you back into it. It's the self-doubt loop that manages you, okay? So let's put some language behind or on what I mean by self-doubt here. Self-doubt is the habit of believing the loudest, harshest voice in your own head over what you actually know to be true about yourself. For alienated parents, it often sounds like, I made this worse. If I were a better mom or dad, this wouldn't have happened. If I say anything, I'll push them further away. Maybe everybody else is right about me. If I move forward with this, I'll ruin whatever tiny chance that I have left. Does any of that sound familiar? When those sentences show up, your brain doesn't present them as random thoughts. It presents them as facts. Though I'm going to touch on that in a second. There's a caveat, or there's an add-on to that I'll touch on in here in a minute. But here's the thing that I really want you to hear. This is not a character flaw. It's a trauma pattern. Your self-doubt is not fact. Like each one of your doubts about yourself, they're not fact. They're not some verdict. It's a trauma pattern. Your brain has learned over and over that doubting yourself felt safer and sometimes was safer than trusting yourself. So this is a good time to actually point out, many of you talk about quickly, we'll talk about hypervigilance here. And so for many of you, your self-doubt doesn't live only in your thought, it lives in your body as hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is basically just your body stuck on high alert. It's constantly bracing for something to go wrong, even when you're technically safe after emotional abuse. And it's not even just for something to go wrong. You're just hyper aware of all of your surroundings. Yes, you're scanning for threat, but hyper aware of all of your surroundings. Like for me, hypervigilance often looks like fawning, you know, where I'm overly people pleasing. I've grown out of most of that, I think, but not without some pains, and definitely not without, I mean, that was a lot of diligence to work through that, you know? So I saw a great, speaking of that, this is off topic, but I saw such a great, it was probably a year ago, Instagram post on exclamation points and how hypervigilance can show up in using a ton of exclamation points. It was absolutely hilarious though. I'll have to find it. I don't know where I guess I could link it here, like in the show notes. So funny and so true. But anyway, I'll find it and I'll link it in the show notes because it's such worth the watch. It's like, it's under 90 seconds. So, it won't take you that long. It's hilarious. So after emotional abuse, high conflict co-parenting, if we want to call it that even, years of walking on eggshells with your ex maybe, and the shock of losing your child, your brain security system gets locked into overdrive. So of course you find yourself double and triple checking every text or email, analyzing every word in a court document or other documents, replaying every micro expression from your kiddo during a visit, scanning constantly for the next attack, next accusation, or the next shutdown. It all makes sense. Your body is trying to predict and prevent the next explosion before it happens. That's what I mean when I say that this is a trauma pattern, not a personality flaw. Your self-doubt is riding on top of a nervous system that has been trained by experience to see threat everywhere. So here's the picture that I want you to hold for the rest of this episode. Self-doubt is the scared kid in the car with you. Self-trust is the wise, steady parent. Confidence is just how many miles you've already driven together and the knowing of those miles and how many roads you've been on. When the scared kid is driving, they're gripping the wheel, eyes huge, saying, don't turn there, it's dangerous. Don't do that. That's going to get us hurt, harmed, ousted. Don't send that, they'll hate you. Don't speak up, the judge will think you're crazy, or whoever will think you're crazy. Don't reach out, you'll just get hurt again. More examples of that and the way it looks for us, like detailed in real time. One of the ways is we fall into this. I always want to second guess saying that we fall into it. Yes, before we're aware, we can fall into the distortion trap and like memory sabotage, where you're questioning your own history with your child. So when the alienating parent, your ex or whoever's doing the alienating, distorts past events, telling your child and sometimes you that what you thought was a fun vacation was actually miserable, or maybe that you were never there. Maybe it was just the narrative for them is that you were just never there. You never spent time with your kid anyway. You may begin to doubt the validity of your own positive memories and experience, right? You might think, was I actually present? As present as I thought? Maybe I did ruin that trip like they said, Or maybe it was that my time away from work or whatever was more negatively impactful on my child than I thought. I have this experience for me where certain things were blown up. I think we all do. Certain things, time frames or like vacations is the one I've got on my mind, was blown up and taken all hearsay out of context. And I still, to this day, when I think back on that, I'm like, was that hurtful? Was that harmful? Or what? That was probably the narrative, right? That they were using. There was this, we had this, I don't know if I'm going to include this or not only just for time's sake, but my dad has a place down in the Keys, in the Florida Keys. And we always used to go to it like for long weekends and any of the holidays. My daughter and I would go down there and use it. And it wasn't just a place down the Keys. It was like a compound. So there were 3 houses in the compound. One of them was the architect who did all the houses, right? And then it was my dad's house that was all of them are on the water. So the backyard was the bay. And then the house behind it, which is like a football field away, maybe less, half a football field away, was the back house, which was where me and my daughter stayed. And one night I went down to the dog. And somehow, because my daughter and I slept together at the time, I mean, she was 6, maybe 5 or 6 years old, 6 probably. And she woke up, I guess, when I got up, right when I did, and she didn't know where I went. She couldn't see the dock. So then she wandered over to the architect's house, who was like her grandma. And that story, looking for me, and then anyway, it was a whole thing. But of course, that story got blown up as to I went out partying and left my daughter to fend for herself, when this is a gated compound where my dad and his wife and everybody, but it was family, you know? There's croquet out. I mean, it was anyway, safe and whatever. But I did always wonder, was that me? Did I do it wrong? Should I not have gotten out of bed and gone down to the dock, whatever. So there you go. Maybe you have something similar happen with you. Another way is we can assume responsibility for the rejection, because our children will often offer ridiculous sounding excuses for rejecting us, like the house smells bad, or it's untidy, or disorganized, or not fun, or whatever it is that they're saying. We as targeted parents may actually spiral into self-doubt, wondering if the trivial issues that are being offered are actually deep character flaws, which will lead to a belief that we're somehow not good enough. And then that, of course, is going to lead to intense self-loathing, shame, self-doubt. You might conclude, if my child hates me this much, that I must have done something truly terrible that I'm just not seeing. Or this must have, like I mentioned a minute ago, this must have affected them way deeper and more negatively than I ever believed or thought at the time, right? Here's the thing, is that this often, like the I must have done something truly terrible that I'm just not seeing, oftentimes this will fly way under the radar, like you've heard me talk about before, because we're so used to being on defense to the world, trying to prove ourselves worthy, that even with ourselves, we want to argue ourselves out, or our way out of that deeper, quiet fear of, like, maybe it's something truly terrible that I'm not seeing, the self-doubt fear. We'll completely argue our way out of it because we're so used to being on the stands publicly. And so that mindset of being a bit hypervigilant and on defense ends up bleeding into our own talk with ourselves. But then, because awareness and acknowledgement are the first step to your involvement, and that we're too busy denying all these accusations even to ourselves, that we end up, the fear that you have that maybe it was me ends up going unrecognized, and then no change can happen because you've now already argued your way out of it and tossed it aside, dismissed it. But if it keeps coming up for you, like, was it me? And then you're like, no, of course it wasn't me. I hope I'm making sense here. Of course it wasn't me. No, I've done all these things. I've done blah, blah, blah. That argument becomes center stage. And then because we want to protect ourselves, our system wants to protect ourselves, well, we're going to go with the more positive one because we've been fed so much negative about ourselves. So then what happens is that true fear that you have, that maybe it was me, ends up getting drowned out by your correction of it, but then you never deal with the actual deep-seated fear, so then it will keep coming up for you. Does that make sense? Okay. So another way is you may go into a state of like hesitation and also walking on eggshells. So constant threat appraisal leads us to doubt our natural parenting instincts. We end up being fearful that any discipline or normal parenting boundary will be used by the alienator as proof of abuse, or being too strict, or being too lenient too. So we end up instead overcorrecting and becoming super passive or over accommodating, which, of course, this creates a cycle where we doubt our ability to lead, which will come out in thoughts like, I can't tell them to do their homework because they'll tell the other parent that I'm mean and I will lose my job forever. Or I can't tell them to put their phone down while we're eating because, again, I'll be too strict and then I will lose them forever. They'll want to go over to dad's or mom's house, and that will be the end of that. So instead, we sit quiet, sit tight, and let it all go over, which it reinforces the child role for us and them as the parent role. So the problem is not Oh, one more of them. Sorry, I forgot another one. I'm not watching my notes. The other one is that you internalize, and this is kind of what we've been talking about already, that you internalize the villain label. So alienators will often frame us, the targeted parent, as dangerous or unsafe without any factual basis, right? This is nothing new for you. After years of being told that we are narcissists or toxic, right? We're the ones that are narcissists or toxic. You might start to monitor your own behavior for these traits through an obsessive doubting lens. This is something that happened with me. I was called an alienator before I even knew what that term was. It's like, what? What are you talking about? Because my daughter at the time would cry every time she would go over to dad's. But this was all new. And at the time that it was happening, she was still, she was in my arms. She was going through this phase, and I haven't really done much thought about this until just now, but she was going through this phase where she just didn't like men. And I don't know if it was ever something that I said, because she was little itty bitty and I didn't, anyway, it's a thing. So she wasn't comfortable, also because he was gone. Pretty much, I mean, he was a consultant, software consultant. So in sales, he's consultant and then he was sales. And he was gone Monday through Thursday every week. So she wasn't spending that much time with him. And then when we split, anyway, so as I'm saying, I'm just proving my point here. What I'm saying is that we'll be the ones that are called narcissists or toxic or alienators even, right? So you may start to monitor your own behavior for these kinds of traits through obsessive doubting sort of lens on your own self. So the problem is not, you guys, that you have this scared little child of self-doubt part. Of course you do. It makes sense given everything I've just shared with you, right? The problem is when you keep handing them the keys and allowing them to be the tour guide through your life. So let's talk about how that scared driver got there in the first place. First, number one is emotional gaslighting and blame. When you're being told that you're too sensitive, you're too much, the real problem, or when paperwork literally labels you as high conflict or unfit, your brain learns a very brutal lesson here. My perception, your perception, is wrong. I can't trust myself. That's what happens there. You may not say it in these words at all, but the idea there is, they're telling me this, and even the professionals are telling me this. What does that mean about me? Is this who I am? And so a lot of times we'll go and try to find other people that know us to validate what our true feelings are about ourselves. Like, am I blah, 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 overbearing and this, that, whatever? I'm not caring for my kid? Or am I, you ask other people what they witnessed with you, because it feels like crazy town in your brain. So that's one way it gets there. The second way is unpredictability, right? 1 minute things are calm and the next there's an explosion. Your ex will flip the script. Your child will suddenly pull away. A court decision will blindside you. Your nervous system, from all of those things and many more, your nervous system will learn any move could set off a bomb. So the safest move starts to feel like no move at all. You make yourself small. You try to go unnoticed. I had just a funny scene come into my mind. If you guys have watched, I love this show, Arrested Development, where Buster is going to the Milford Academy, funnily enough, and their whole thing was children should be seen and not heard, and so Buster mastered that skill so well, and he became he actually stayed in the school an extra year after he graduated because he liked the school so much. And he went unnoticed throughout that whole year. He blended into anyway, funny, not funny. I know we're talking about alienation, but I think sometimes it helps to have some funny pictures in your mind. And Buster always does that for me. Anyway, the third thing, back to here, on task. Loyalty binds and the terror of losing your child completely. When the message in the air is one wrong step and they'll hate you forever, any loving parent system is going to slam on the brakes. Of course, right? If you've been through all of that, of course there is a little one, right? Your little self-doubt screaming in the back seat. Please do not drive that route again. Please. of course, also that there's a part of you that believes from the bottom of his or her little theoretical heart that the way to keep everyone safest is to keep you small, quiet, and still, unnoticed, right? Your self-doubt is your brain's clumsy, overprotective attempt to keep you from ever feeling that level of pain again. The problem is it's not always as successful as it aims to be, self-doubt. So the next time that you hear that inner voice of self-doubt say something like you're ruining everything, or you always make it worse, or don't do that, don't go there, you're going to get noticed or chastised or whatever, I want you to try on a couple questions for yourself. What if that voice that you're hearing is not any sort of proof that you're a terrible parent or you're incapable? What if it's proof instead that your brain has been working overtime to protect you? Taking into consideration the wrecks and the collisions you've been in, the court battles, the character assassinations, the ache of an empty room where your child's belongings used to be, it makes sense that you would want a protective part of you to slam on the brakes sometimes. We are not going to let self-doubt drive forever, but we also don't have to treat it like the enemy. We can start to see it as a scared little kid, like we're talking about, who needs a steadier driver in the front seat. That's all. So this week, I want you to take that same homework that we were talking about from last week one step further. So step one is to grab what you wrote down last week. And if you didn't do the homework, no shame at all, not a big deal. Just think of one recent moment where you chose comfort and later regretted it. And if you haven't listened to last week's episode, maybe go get that a listen too. But so choose one recent moment where you chose comfort instead of growth, right? And then later regretted it, or you know that later you're going to regret it. Step two then is to rewrite that moment as a little scene with the scared kid driving the car. Literally describe it like this. Bullet points is fine. My scared kid was driving when I, whatever you did or didn't do. Didn't send the text, put it off again, whatever, right? My scared kid was driving when I blank. In that moment, my scared kid was saying, and finish the sentence. Whatever that was is really helpful. I know this sounds like elementary to do, but it's really helpful to do this because you're bringing awareness to the parts of you and your system that are trying to deny it, kind of like I was talking about a little bit ago, okay? So in that moment, my scared kid was saying what? Okay? And then step three, I said, I'm holding up two, but I mean three. And then I want you to add one line from the confident, steady driver in you, even if it's tiny. Something like, I get why you're so scared. We've been through a lot. This is parts work, okay? Next time, I'm going to practice taking the wheel for one stretch of the road. That's what you're going to say back, and you can write this down too. Because writing it down, well, you've probably heard me talk about this if you've been listening for a little while. Writing it down will have you get some separation, but also bring more awareness in a different way to the parts of you that want to la 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 la. Shut the ears down and, deflect or go pretend like it's not happening. You don't have to change the whole pattern this week. Your only job is to start seeing with compassion. Like, oh, that wasn't just me being a mess. That's what I used to say to myself all the time. Oh my God, I was a fucking mess. I'm being a mess again. That's how I spoke to myself, but I never really knew I was thinking to myself like that. Because I was a hermit, I wasn't talking to anybody else back then. It was just me. And so I wasn't aware of all the nasty ways I talked to myself and what I was believing about myself. So that's another reason why it's good to really get to write it down. But that wasn't me just being a mess. That was my scared kid driving the car again. My scared kid of self-doubt. My scared kid of whatever it is, But right now, since we're talking about self-doubt. So this is just the last thing I want to say here is the fact that you're even here listening to a podcast like this, right? On your healing after something as traumatic as we've gone through and are going through tells me that there's already a steady driver inside of you right now. You are not the scared kid. That is not who you are. You are the one that gets to learn how to drive again, even with that kid sitting in the back seat. Okay? Next week, we're going to look at what self-trust actually looks like after alienation. How to stop handing the keys over to self-doubt, waiting to feel 100% confident first. And we're going to get into what it means to have your own back, right? Which I talk about a lot, even when the courts, the exes, and sometimes your children don't. If this episode helped, it would mean, of course, as I've been saying, it would mean the world to me if you shared it with one other alienated parent who's been stuck riding in the back seat while self-doubt has been behind the wheel. So you are doing so much better, I promise you, than your brain is probably telling you. We're going to keep building on this too. Okay, so next time I want to walk you through how to start actually taking the keys back from that scared kid in a way that doesn't blow out your nervous system. So you can move toward your child and toward your future from a place of self-trust instead of constant self-doubt. All right? So that's what I have for you guys today. I've got so much love for you guys. So much love for you. And I'm offering that you love yourself so much this week. Okay? And I will see you next time. Okay, bye.